I'm standing here in what used to be a fortress, stone walls 3 meters thick, built to keep enemies out, or perhaps to keep people in. It's difficult to tell the difference sometimes, isn't it? When I first watched Attack on Titan, I was struck by something profoundly unsettling. Not the violence, not the grotesque imagery of humanity being devoured. No, what disturbed me was the walls themselves. Those magnificent, impossible structures that humanity had built to survive. Because I recognized them, we all should. The walls in Attack on Titan are not merely plot devices. They are the most honest representation of what we've done to ourselves for millennia. We build walls and call it civilization. We construct barriers and name it security. We cage ourselves and dare to call it freedom. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus that there is only one truly serious philosophical question: suicide, whether life is worth living. The people within those walls face this question every single day, but they've answered it in the most human way possible, by not answering it at all. They simply continue, they wake up, they work, they pretend the walls will hold forever. This is what Camus called philosophical suicide, the act of accepting comfortable lies rather than confronting the absurd truth of existence. For 100 years, humanity within those walls chose the comfort of ignorance over the terror of freedom. But here's what makes Attack on Titan philosophically brilliant. It doesn't let them keep that comfort. It doesn't let us keep that comfort. Let me tell you about Eren Yeager, a boy who wanted nothing more than to be free, who looked at those walls and saw them for what they truly were: a prison, who dreamed of the ocean, of horizons without barriers, of a world beyond the cage. Be careful what you wish for. Eren's journey is the most brutal deconstruction of the concept of freedom I've encountered in contemporary fiction. Because Eren gets what he wants. He breaks through the walls, he gains power, he sees beyond the horizon. And what does he find? More walls. Different walls. Walls made of hatred, of history, of cyclical violence that stretches back generations. And here's where Attack on Titan transcends entertainment and becomes philosophy. Eren realizes that to be truly free, he must destroy not just the physical walls, but the entire system that makes walls necessary. This is where we must confront Jean-Paul Sartre's most terrifying insight. We are condemned to be free. Freedom is not a gift, it's a burden. It's a responsibility so heavy that most of us spend our entire lives trying to escape it. Sartre wrote that man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. Eren embodies this with horrifying completeness. He makes himself into a monster, not because he's evil, but because he's free. Truly, terribly free. When Eren says, "I just keep moving forward until my enemies are destroyed," he's not speaking as a villain. He's speaking as someone who has accepted the full weight of existential freedom. He has chosen, and in choosing, he has become responsible for everything that follows. This is the darkness at the heart of existentialism that Camus and Sartre both recognized. Freedom and morality are not natural allies. Sometimes they're enemies. To be free means to be free to choose evil, to choose destruction, to choose the unforgivable. The question Attack on Titan forces us to confront is this: if your freedom requires the oppression or destruction of others, is it freedom at all? Or is it just another form of tyranny wearing a different mask? Let's talk about what those walls really represent. Because Hajime Isayama, the creator of Attack on Titan, has constructed something far more sophisticated than a simple post-apocalyptic survival story. The walls are social constructs in the most literal sense. They were built by King Fritz using the power of the Titans, yes, but more importantly, they were maintained by lies, by false history, by manufactured ignorance. The people within the walls were told they were the last of humanity. They were told the world beyond was empty, dead, consumed by monsters. Every single word was a lie. This is precisely how social constructs function in our world. We are born into systems, economic, political, cultural, that present themselves as natural, as inevitable, as the only possible way things could be. We're told these walls protect us, that without them we would perish, that questioning them is dangerous, even treasonous. Michel Foucault spent his life analyzing how power creates truth, how institutions manufacture reality itself. The government within the walls, the monarchy, the military, the religious order, they didn't just control people's bodies. They controlled their reality. They controlled what could be known, what could be questioned, what could even be imagined. When the Survey Corps discovers the truth, that humanity exists beyond the walls, that they've been lied to for generations, it's not just a plot twist, it's a philosophical rupture. It's what Thomas Kuhn called a paradigm shift, when the entire framework of understanding collapses and must be rebuilt from nothing. But here's what makes this brilliant. The revelation doesn't bring freedom. It brings chaos. It brings civil war. It brings the realization that some people prefer the comfortable lie to the uncomfortable truth. That some people would rather die within the walls than live with the knowledge of what lies beyond. This is the tragedy of enlightenment. This is what Plato understood in his allegory of the cave. The prisoners in the cave don't thank you for showing them the sun. They try to kill you, because you've destroyed their world. You've made their comfortable darkness impossible to return to. The walls in Attack on Titan are racism, their nationalism, their religious dogma, their every ideology that says, we are safe here and they are dangerous out there. Their every system that promises security in exchange for freedom, comfort in exchange for truth. And the most disturbing part, sometimes the walls do keep us safe, sometimes the monsters are real. This is the moral complexity that elevates Attack on Titan beyond simple allegory. If Eren represents the will to freedom at any cost, then Armin Arlert represents something equally important: the will to remain human while pursuing that freedom. Armin is the conscience of Attack on Titan. He's the voice that asks, but at what cost? He's the character who understands that the means cannot be separated from the ends, that how we achieve freedom determines what kind of freedom we actually achieve. There's a moment, and if you've watched the series, you know the one I mean, where Armin must make a choice that destroys his innocence forever. He must become a killer to save his friends, and afterwards he weeps, not because he regrets the choice, but because he understands what he's lost. He understands that survival has a price, and sometimes that price is your own humanity. This is the ethical core of Attack on Titan. Everyone is forced to make impossible choices. There are no clean hands. There is no moral high ground. There is only the question, what are you willing to sacrifice, and can you live with yourself afterwards? Levi Ackerman embodies a different philosophical position entirely. Levi is a pragmatist in the most brutal sense. He has seen too much death, too much suffering, to believe in grand ideals. When he says, "Give up on your dreams and die," he's not being cruel. He's being honest about the cost of survival in a world that wants you dead. Levi represents what Camus called the absurd hero, someone who continues to fight, to struggle, to make meaning, even while fully aware that the universe is indifferent to his suffering. Levi knows that most of his comrades will die. He knows that their sacrifices might mean nothing. He fights anyway, not because he believes in victory, but because the struggle itself is the only meaning available. When Levi gives his famous speech, "Give meaning to their deaths," he's articulating a purely existentialist ethics. There is no inherent meaning in death. There is no cosmic justice. There is only what we choose to make of it. The dead cannot give meaning to their own deaths. Only the living can do that by continuing to fight, by refusing to let their sacrifice be in vain. This is Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the mountain, knowing it will roll back down, pushing anyway, because the pushing itself is the point. Now we must confront the darkest aspect of Attack on Titan's philosophy, the cycle of violence. The revelation that the Titans were once human, that the monsters were created by oppression, by genocide, by centuries of hatred and revenge. The Eldians were oppressed, so they oppressed others. Then they were oppressed again. Then they oppressed again. Back and forth, generation after generation, each side convinced of their righteousness, each side carrying the wounds of the past like weapons to justify the wounds they inflict in the present. This is not fantasy. This is history. This is Palestine and Israel. This is Rwanda. This is the Balkans. This is every conflict where people say, "But they did it first," as if that justifies anything, as if that breaks the cycle rather than perpetuating it. Attack on Titan asks the question that political philosophy has struggled with for centuries. How do you break a cycle of violence? How do you achieve justice when both sides have legitimate grievances? When both sides have been victims and victimizers? Hannah Arendt, in her analysis of totalitarianism and violence, understood that revenge cannot break these cycles. Revenge only feeds them. Justice, real justice, requires something far more difficult: the willingness to absorb violence without returning it. The willingness to say, "The cycle ends with me." But Attack on Titan doesn't give us that easy answer, because it asks the follow-up question: is it moral to absorb violence? If someone is trying to exterminate you, is pacifism justice or suicide? If your people have been oppressed for generations, is forgiveness wisdom or cowardice? These are not rhetorical questions. These are the questions that define our current moment in history. And Attack on Titan refuses to answer them. It only shows us the consequences of every choice. It shows us that violence begets violence, that freedom for one group often means oppression for another, that there might not be a solution, only different kinds of tragedy. So we return to where we began: the walls, freedom. The question that haunts every frame of Attack on Titan: what does it mean to be free? Eren's answer is absolute freedom, even if it requires absolute destruction. Armin's answer is freedom tempered by compassion, even if it means accepting limitations. Levi's answer is that freedom is an illusion, but we fight for it anyway, because the fight itself is what makes us human. And the series' final devastating answer, that perhaps true freedom is impossible, that we are all trapped, not by walls of stone, but by history, by biology, by the fundamental fact that we exist in relation to others, that my freedom inevitably impinges on yours, that we are all both prisoners and jailers. Camus wrote that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, that the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a human heart. But Attack on Titan asks, what if the boulder is crushing other people on its way down? What if your struggle for meaning creates meaningless suffering for others? This is the question that makes Attack on Titan the darkest treatise on freedom since Camus. Because it doesn't offer hope, it doesn't offer solutions, it only offers honesty, the brutal, unflinching honesty that freedom is not a destination, but a burden, that choosing is not liberation, but responsibility, that being truly free means being truly accountable for every consequence of your freedom. The walls will always be there. Maybe not walls of stone, but walls of fear, of history, of the fundamental human need for security in an insecure world. And perhaps the question is not how to destroy all walls, but how to live with the walls we cannot destroy. How to be as free as possible while recognizing that absolute freedom is another name for absolute isolation. I don't have an answer. Camus didn't have an answer, and neither does Attack on Titan. But perhaps asking the question, really asking it, without flinching from its implications, is the closest we can come to freedom. The walls are still standing. The question remains, are we inside them, or are they inside us? Thank you for walking this path with me. Until next time.